Hello and welcome to Roshango's Reviews, the show where I talk about the latest movies in theaters near you, my personal thoughts, and whether or not you should go see them or not. I'm your host, Aaron Bolio, and welcome to the show. And a very special show, if you ask me, because it's a milestone. We've reached episode 10. So thanks for everyone in Leominster and anyone online who's been joining in and following the discussion. So, this week, I saw two movies that I really enjoyed just in time for our special 10th episode. So, I guess we'll hop right in with the first one. Now, this first one was one that actually got really to me. It's probably one of the three best movies I've seen, and since I started the show anyway, and I'm really trying to debate where it lands. I guess I'll do a correction from earlier episode, because things change as you look back. I did a review of Disney's Inside Out earlier this year, and I believe I gave it either an 8 or an 8.5, but on retrospect, it was probably better than that, and I've bumped it up to about a 9. So the movie tonight, it's going to be up there with Inside Out and Mad Max in the category of the 9 out of 10s. Spoiler alert on that. But it's kind of odd, too, since those are such varying movies. But this first one is Trainwreck, a movie directed by Judd Apatow and written and performed by Amy Schumer, the comedian that you may have seen her show Inside Amy Schumer on Comedy Central. I've never seen the show, but this movie wants me to at least check it out for the comedy factor, because Amy Schumer knocked it out of the park in this one. But before I get too much into this movie, I'll go a little bit into the director, Judd Apatow, who has had a very long history of directing comedy movies. Very long. I looked him up on Rotten Tomatoes shortly after seeing the movie, just so I could get a reminder of all the stuff he's done, because I've seen so many of his movies. And you'll see a very mixed lot of movies. His worst movies being crappy Adam Sandler movies like You Don't Mess with Zohan. Some of his best comedies being a lot of Will Ferrell's, like Step Brothers and Anchorman. And some of his absolute best overall work has been with Seth Rogen in movies such as Pineapple Express and Knocked Up. So he's done a very wide variety of hit and miss, but when he hits, he's got a very high ceiling. And Trainwreck was a movie that hit that ceiling. What's this movie about? Well, from the opening scene, we see a flashback to younger versions of our main characters, especially Amy, played by Amy Schumer. The two little girls are being talked to by their father in a hilarious scene where he tells them that he's going to divorce their mother because he just can't handle commitment. He explains it in one of the funniest ways ever to a 4-year-old and a 9-year-old that you'll ever see in any movie, where he basically says, "No, I'm pretty much leaving your mother to sleep around," without directly telling them. But he basically kind of tries to drill in their head that, you know, monogamy's a joke, commitment's a joke, there's no such thing as a happy ending, so just try to live it up as you can. The younger daughter, I believe her name was Lisa, did not take that to heart, and she eventually did get married and is expecting a child throughout this movie. Amy, on the other hand, took this lesson very much to heart because she looks so much up to her father, and she spent her whole life not really caring about men. Not like she's a lesbian or doesn't really find anyone attractive. She sleeps around a lot, but she refuses to make an actual commitment or truly fall in love with somebody. This results in her having very shallow relationships where she ends up cheating on her boyfriend, played by John Cena at the beginning of the movie, who does a fantastic job, with a lot of other men. Eventually, she does meet Aaron. I wonder why I like that name so much. Aaron is played by Bill Hader, who you may have seen on Saturday Night Live. See, Amy works for a magazine company, and the magazine company is one of these real big tabloid, very scandalous kind of magazine companies. But they have a story. See, Aaron is a very famous sports surgeon who works on some of the best-known athletes in the world, like Tom Brady and Alex Rodriguez, and specifically in this one, Amir Stoudemire from the New York Knicks, who is about to receive a knee surgery from Aaron, it's a first ever knee surgery. It's a new experimental one that will either rebuild and make Amir as good as he's ever been, or completely ruin his career. And they asked Amy, because she knows nothing about sports, to look at it as from a anti-sports biased point of view, and learn more about Aaron and write an article about him. In that time, she starts to sort of feel for him. There's a few kind of key scenes that sort of start bringing them together, and next thing you know, Amy's starting to break her cycle. And it's funny watching her in a panic as she starts to actually have feelings towards someone. It's really new to her, which is interesting because she's clearly someone in her late 20s, early 30s, to only just actually have feelings of love towards somebody now. And so the majority of the movie follows Amy as she basically tries to see if she could make it work with somebody who's not the kind of man that she's used to dating. Meanwhile, her father is in a nursing home and trying to overcome his MS. And I guess not really a real coherent story, but it's not as much about the story as it is about Amy's life and what happens. So I'll get right to it. This was about as perfect as a movie as I've seen this year, which to a lot of people, it's not going to be as great, and I think I can definitely see a lot of people hating this, but I absolutely loved this movie. For starters, it was a comedy, and it was actually a funny comedy. One of the first ones I've seen all year. Now, I mentioned, like when I did my TED 2 review, that I thought the first half was hilarious, and then the second half just left me hanging and disappointed. Same thing with a lot of these. Spy had some really, really funny moments, but it never really carried its momentum. Trainwreck, on the other hand, I was dying laughing from the opening scene, and the whole time I was watching it, I was expecting it to just stop getting funny and to let me down, but it carried the momentum right on through to the end. I wouldn't say every scene, but the absolute majority, 90% of the scenes, had something to laugh about. It kept you going through the whole thing. And even when it didn't, it got very sentimental, and it hit you really hard. And I guess the best way I could describe it was genuine. Genuine was the best word I could think of. Amy and her sister, it felt like an actual siblings. Amy and her father felt like actual father and daughter. Amy and Aaron felt like an actual couple. Amy and the other guys felt like an actual one-night stand or just short fling. Amy and her boss felt like a genuine work relationship. Everything felt so real, and it kept you through the whole moments, and that's what made the funny scenes even funnier and the sad scenes hit you right in the gut. Now, I personally, even after leaving the movie, I had to sit in my car and take about 5 or 10 minutes to compose myself because I actually started to draw some tears from this. This is one of the few movies that's actually been able to draw a tear from me. Now, the biggest strength of this was Amy Schumer. As I said, this was funny from beginning to end, and Amy was the reason why. She wrote it too, which was something I didn't realize until I saw the credits. But I believe she was in 90% of the movie. There was a couple scenes where it was Aaron and his best friend LeBron James, who did a pretty good job in this as well. But Amy Schumer, and this is interesting because I've mentioned a lot of times in this movie that I really liked the side character, or the main character was okay, but some of the other ones were better. This was one of the few movies that I've seen this year where the main character is my favorite part, and she kept me invested through the whole movie. She carried it so well, and I should expect this from someone who's had a lot of experience on TV, but who is a pretty famous comedian herself, to make a funny movie. Now, this is where it gets a little kind of wishy-washy for various people, and it's kind of one of the reasons why I didn't give this one a perfect score, was the majority of the scenes that were funny definitely got dirty. There was a lot of dirty humor in this, Now, I think that's a big difference, though. There's a big, big difference between a scene that's dirty and inappropriate, a sex scene, people swearing a lot, you know, the things that the real uptight people might get a little pissed off about. Being dirty or inappropriate on its own isn't funny, and if it isn't funny, it detaches the audience. Being clever is funny, and you can be both, and that's what this was. There was a lot of dirty scenes, there was a lot of sex scenes, but they were done so well, written so well, and written so cleverly, that those were some of the funniest parts of the movie. That's something I always give credit to Judd Apatow for. He's known for some of the funniest sex scenes ever. Normally, I'm not a big fan of sex scenes in movies just because they just feel kind of awkward. It feels like you just walked into a stranger's house and caught them doing their most personal act, but Judd Apatow has directed some of the funniest ones, such as the ones from Step Brothers, such as the one from Anchorman when they're riding on unicorns, and such as the one from Knocked Up when they're concerned if they're going to hurt the baby or not. He just does them so well. I don't know why. It's a really weird talent to have, but the dirty jokes were funny. They didn't scare me away. Now, I know some people who might be really, really, really sensitive and really easily offended are not going to like this movie, but if you can handle it, I would definitely go see it because it's hilarious in those regards. Bill Hader does a great job, too. He's a constant Saturday Night Live member, and he's been known for all sorts of other things, but he carries the role as Aaron so great, and it actually, I'm really glad he was casted in this because normally in these romantic comedies or, you know, these big, sappy romantic movies, you usually have a Channing Tatum or a Matt Gosling, you know, a Ryan Gosling, excuse me, who have the big six-pack and they're there to look sexy even though they can't really. And this is nothing against Ryan Gosling. Channing Tatum, on the other hand, I'm not a big fan of, but they're not the best actors. You never really feel a genuine connection. It's just sort of something that a woman could watch and fantasize about being in that place. But in this, they pick Bill Hader, who's kind of a nerdy-looking guy and plays a nerdy-looking person. Actually, his character is genuinely nerdy. And it is really clever, and I think it's a very good move away from the conventional romantic comedy, especially because it's important in this movie. A quote that they make later on is basically when Amy spent her whole life sleeping around, she's always sleeping around with these dumb hot guys. And she always thinks, you know, if they're dumb enough, I could never actually get feelings towards them. And she has a big rule about staying over somebody's house. The only time it's ever happened was when she was blackout drunk. But in this movie, she stays over his house after sex completely sober, and she doesn't have a problem with it. And then she begins thinking about it. And she starts to realize, oh crap, I just hooked up with someone who's actually really smart. He's a doctor. So next thing you know, she's actually finding legitimate romantic connections to him instead of just, look at those abs, I guess is the best way I could put that. And it felt really awesome watching her character development through it too. She had a neat little arc. You know, she spent her whole life listening to her father drill in her head that, you know, marriage is a lie, all this stuff, and she spent the whole first half of the movie really judgmental of her sister as she's having a child and she's married and she has a stepchild already. She thinks that she's thrown her life, Amy thinks that her sister has thrown her life away because of this. And it's just interesting watching her sort of come to reality that eventually we all do want to settle down and be with someone. So in the end, I'm going to give Trainwreck a 9 out of 10, and I guess that, after changing Inside Out, is my third official 9 out of 10. I had a big emotional response leaving the movie where I felt, oh, it's so perfect, I want to put a 10. But then I kind of started reading the criticisms, and I do realize there's some legit ones. I did kind of realize that, you know, this is not for everybody. If this was for everybody, it definitely would have helped it a little bit more, but there are a lot of people who are easily offended who aren't going to like it. And there are also I think I want to save that perfect rating for a movie that's completely revolutionary. One of those just all-time greats. And I don't see this ever being an all-time great, but this has become quickly one of my favorite movies. I give all the credit in the world to Amy Schumer. I give all the credit in the world to Judd Apatow and Bill Hader. Everybody followed through, and it just made a movie that really hit me personally. And maybe it won't hit you personally, but go see it. It is at least going to leave you with laughs, if not tears. It was just as perfect as a movie as you can get. Now on to the next one. Ant-Man, the newest Marvel movie that come out this year. That's right, we've been having quite a few of those already. I already reviewed Avengers, and Fantastic Four is going to be coming out later on this summer. But I got to say, Ant-Man, the best way I could describe it, throws fresh wood on the Marvel fire. That's the way I decided to word this. It felt like the flames were sort of dying. Not that I didn't like Avengers 2, because if you saw that review, I really enjoyed it. It reminded me a lot of the first one, although I wasn't quite sure if it was as good. I wasn't quite sure if it was better than the first one. But Marvel's novelty's been kind of running thin. They really kicked off with Iron Man back in 2008, but here we are 7 years later, and it's starting to feel like the gimmick's running through, but Ant-Man felt so fresh to me. So what is Ant-Man? What is this one about? Well, Scott is a thief who has had a long criminal history and is divorced and has very, very, very limited time to see his daughter, mainly because of his criminal record has limited his visitation rights down to basically 0. So Scott's trying to find a way to turn his life around, despite the fact that all he's really known is how to break into places. And he's a professional thief. He has done a lot of big-name heists on big-name places. So his roommate gives him this idea, tells him that he has this job for him, that he heard from a very long list of connections, that there's a rich dude in town who has a big safe, and within this safe has to be something really good because it's one of the craziest safes in town. Even though Scott knows that his criminal record's what's keeping him from his daughter, he knows he needs to make a big score if he's going to be able to fund a way to turn his life around. So he decides to take the job. When he breaks into the home, all he finds is a peculiar suit, the Ant-Man suit that you see in the movie. He steals it, thinking, well, it's got to be worth something, right? And he ends up putting it on. When he puts the suit on, he hears a voice in his head, transmission, actually, from Mr. Pym. Pym is the founder of Pym, I believe, Industries. It's one of those big superhero-related industries, but Pym tells him that he's glad that he finally found the suit and he needs his help. Scott accidentally shrinks down with the suit, is terrified, doesn't really know how to use it, so he takes it. So once he figures out how to become big again, he takes it off and tries to return it to the owner, only to find himself getting arrested, only for Pym to break him back out of jail. So Scott finds out what this is all really about. You see, Pym has worked a long time and was the original Ant-Man back in the Cold War. But there's now a lot of trouble. His former protege, who is now the owner of it, or president of his company, has made a new version of the Ant-Man suit, the suit that shrinks people down to the size of an ant, but they retain the same strength and speed and agility and jumping power and all that stuff that you would have as a normal-sized human being. So you basically are a human bullet, if you will. He finds out that his former president of the company has found a way to develop his own suit, a better suit, but it's kind of beginning to lead him to madness. And Pym needs Scott to steal the suit back before he tries to sell it to the wrong people and before it goes into the wrong hands. Because this suit, as Pym describes, is one of the more ultimate weapons in the world. He can't call the Avengers because he's terrified that Tony Stark will try and steal the technology. And it turns out Pym has been following Scott for some time because he knows how awesome of a thief he is. And that brings me to the first thing I like about the movie, is that it's a heist movie. Basically, the main story is Pym is trying to train Scott to become the Ant-Man so he can steal the Yellow Jacket suit, which is the other Ant-Man suit. And the heist movie is what makes this really entertaining. It's a new twist on the superhero movie. You normally see the superheroes trying to fight off a big bad enemy, like they do in all these. And I mean, there's been a lot of different twists. Captain America: Winter Soldier felt like a really great secret agent movie. Iron Man was just kind of your regular superhero movie. But this one was a heist, which is something I've never seen before in a superhero movie. And that's what made it really interesting. They were kind of the good guys, but they were doing something kind of illegal, but for right purposes. And I always find really good heist movies really entertaining because it's really fun watching them plan this out, watching them execute it after hearing about all the planning, and then seeing what goes wrong, how they improvise, and what happens in the end. And it's always exciting to know the margin of error is so small, the timing has to be flawless from all the members, and it's really interesting seeing that in a superhero format. Now, the best thing I could use to describe the whole movie is fun. This was a fun movie. It's really, really cool watching him shrink and get larger in that millisecond. It was really fun watching the Ant-Man. This was just one of those superheroes that's really entertaining on screen. Some of them really have it. Like Iron Man was a really cool movie to finally end up on the big screen because of all the crazy things that suit can do. And in the comics, you can have a panel of him getting bigger and then smaller, but until you actually see the special effects of him becoming big and small, you don't really understand it, and it feels like such a rush. It's one of those suits you want to own. It's one of those things you want to do. It was also a hilarious movie. Now, these Marvel movies have been pretty funny, but this was one of the funnier ones, really. When it wasn't focusing on the heist, it was being really, really funny. The supporting cast in particular, who were helping out with the heist, were basically unprofessional goons being thrown into one of the most important heists in the history of the world. And it was just so fun watching these people who look like they have no clue what they're doing, but in the end actually do try and figure this out. And it was also really fun watching various things shrink and get larger. It wasn't just the Ant-Man suit. Thomas the Tank Engine toy anyway, becomes gigantic. That was one of the funniest scenes in the whole movie. It was just a wild circus, and it never took itself too seriously, except for a very few scenes. But those scenes were done seriously so well that it wasn't a detriment to the movie. Now, the other thing that I really thought was fun that they had about it was they've kind of acknowledged where they are in the Marvel Universe. As I mentioned before, they mentioned Tony Stark, and he even ends up fighting the Falcon at one point in the movie, which was a really cool cameo to have. It was interesting watching him go on against an Avenger. And it's kind of interesting, too, because he mentions the Avengers, because the world knows now that it's a worldwide phenomenon. These are our superhero protectors. And it's kind of cool watching the non-Avenger mention the Avengers, and that's how big the universe has gotten at this point. Now, I do have some nitpicks, though. Scott gets a romance with Pym's daughter, Hope, and that's kind of thrown in the end. Now, Hope was an interesting character, and they did have a little bit of chemistry throughout the movie. She helps train him in martial arts and teaches him a lot of useful skills when using the Ant-Man suit and how to help control the ants using a special technology that you use with your mind. But they never really came across to me throughout the movie as a romantic couple. Now, I've never read the comics for Ant-Man, but I'm pretty sure that I guess they're a couple in the Ant-Man comics if they're going to throw it on the movie. These movies generally try to stay loyal to the comics, but as I said, I'm making an assumption, so don't get mad at me if I get that wrong. But in the movie, they just kind of felt more like business partners or associates, not really a couple. Also, you'll notice in the trailer you see the real big shot of the Yellow Jacket in the suit, which was a really intimidating suit and made a really intimidating villain. And even though the fight with Yellow Jacket was really entertaining, it felt really short. You know, they built the Yellow Jacket suit up the whole movie, but we didn't really see it until the last, like, 10 minutes. It would have been much, much cooler if we saw it at the beginning of the movie being used and kind of amp it up, or even have Scott, who was the person in the Yellow Jacket suit, or Cross, I'm sorry, not Scott, Cross, who's in the Yellow Jacket suit, using it earlier on in the movie. That was one of my big things with Iron Man, the first one anyway, was the fact that we didn't really see the main villain in his suit until the very end of the movie, too. It was mainly just watching the hero learn how to use the powers of what he had and not fighting the enemy and the powers that they had. So I would have preferred a lot more Yellow Jacket, because when Yellow Jacket enters the film, it becomes a lot more entertaining, even to the movie standard, because Ant-Man finally has an equal in this. He's beating up henchmen the whole time, but now he's finally fighting his equal. The other thing that really kind of bugged me, and this has been kind of bugging me with a lot of the Marvel movies, but this computer-generated images, the CGI, it's starting to grade. It's way too much of it. Now, it's done really, really well. If you watch my Jurassic World review, I might have mentioned that the dinosaurs in a lot of scenes looked like clay. They didn't look very convincing. They looked like action figures. In Marvel, the CGI is fantastic. I always think that one of the best things they've ever done in CGI was the Hulk in the Avengers movies. But even still, you can tell he's not there, and this whole movie's special effects is CGI, and pretty much every scene of Scott being small was used with CGI, or at least with green screens, you know, the basic computer special effects that are getting kind of old now. What I really have liked to see, and this was a movie that came out in the 90s, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids had used a lot of animatronics, had used a lot of really big inventive sets that were actually there. They made these sets, they made these backyards, and they made all these gigantic versions of small things so you could get an idea of the scale of the world. Now, obviously, this is a superhero movie. It's a little bit different than Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, but it's still a kind of similar premise of being smaller. Now, obviously, you're not going to use those big sets and those big animatronics the whole movie. The movie would look pretty bad if you did, but I think it would have looked a lot better if they had used some of those more conventional effects in this movie. But as I said, I'm just nitpicking. So I'm giving Ant-Man an 8 out of 10. It really felt like a fresh new addition to Marvel, and even though it wasn't as good as Avengers, which came out earlier this year, it's given me some hope for Marvel Stage 3. And I really hope that Marvel Stage 3 goes even bigger and bigger, because I'm starting to get a vibe that Marvel's beginning to run out of steam, even though they are still holding up really well. But Ant-Man definitely got me reinvested in Marvel, especially from being a DC fan, and I'm still waiting for Batman vs. Superman next year. But I would highly advise you go see Ant-Man, and I would highly advise you go see Trainwreck, two movies that I thought were excellent going into my milestone 10th episode. I'm Aaron Bolio. Thank you for watching, and I hope you guys have a good weekend at the movies. Good night.
You're still here? It's over. Go home. Go.